Looks like we're live for the first time in a while.
All right, we're on. Huh?
We're good.
I I gotta get my legs back. I haven't done this in so long. Welcome back. Uh, uh, we are going to do another pop up podcast and talk about the misconceptions that I would say the anti side or the gun ignorant side have of the firearms industry and community as a whole. I mean, that's what
Yeah.
we're talking about, right? And
Yeah, I think the basic idea is a lot of people praise you and how effective you're able to communicate with anti-gun people or even gun neutral people from mental health conferences that you're going to recently or at a bar. So I think this is a good opportunity to kind of dive into some of these hot topics and common topics and see how you kind of address them and approach them. And maybe people will take a little things and make their communication with those types of scenarios more effective.
Yeah, and I think this is a good time to have this as I'm right on a couple days before I'm going to be in Seattle at the Firearms Violence Research Conference. Well, I'll be speaking at. I'm actually speaking on Monday, but apparently, from what I've heard about this conference, is very well attended, and there's very few firearms people there, and it's a lot of researchers and a lot of, I don't want to say anti-gun because I don't know if that's fair yet, but a lot of gun ignorant people that are just into the research piece. So it plays into what we're talking about today.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of researchers. It's cool reading through all the different universities that will be there, and hopefully your workshops well attended because I think they'll learn a few different perspectives. But let's get into it. I think the first one is maybe gun laws and legislation are effective. Why, how do you kind of approach to break down that when somebody thinks, oh, these red flag laws or all of these are so effective and they save lives, and without them, we'd be at a worse place?
Well, I think first you need to ask them exactly what gun law they're talking about and what their opinion is. Um, do less talking at that moment and more listening. So at least you get on this baseline. You're like, okay, what do you think is effective and why do you think it's effective? Or do you not know why it's effective? You're just repeating something like birds who want to fly south but don't know why, right? The famous line that we like to use a lot. Um, Once you can get to the core of what that person's talking about or why they think it's effective, then you could start posing more questions um, as to either make them think about it a little harder or point out the unintentional consequences of it, right? So ERPOs, obviously, I've talked about this in the past. um, Something that's been really effective is pointing out the blind spots that they never had, that how an ERPO could be a barrier to entry, because once again their mind are just thinking of it in the worst case scenario. Kevin is in his yard waving a gun around and there's children playing soccer and he says that there's aliens landing and they're coming to get him, right? Like that's how they envision the ERPO being enacted in every case. And that's just not always the way it happens. Many times it's a judgment call, an opinion call, or somebody's angry at somebody. I mean, we've had those cases where they're false flags. All it takes is one false flag to freak a whole community out, because everyone understands that a lot of people do not like firearms and they hold grudges against people who do. Um, those are the things that I think, in that situation, we're talking about ERPOs, you have to bring the blind spots to the attention. Now, if we're talking about transfer laws, right? Once again, you ask them, you know, why do you feel like this transfer law is a good thing? And they'll usually say something like, hey, you can't just give a gun to somebody. Okay. But what about at a time of crisis, right? So now you got to make them see that blind spot because no one's ever thinking there could be plenty of good reasons for someone to take someone's firearms and remove them from the house, especially when it comes to self deletion or someone who's potentially a harm to others or not in the right frame of mind. Get the firearm out of the house at all costs. You shouldn't be punished for doing that. So those are two examples that I like to use. You know, Like I said, just getting people to think, getting people to have the conversation. And all this, of course, requires you to stay calm and the way you approach the thing, not acting like a know it all or like trying to make someone feel stupid for what they think is their truth. That's the most important thing when it comes to having these discussions.
And it shines a light on why it's important for you to be there. A lot of people have maybe had negative reactions or opinions about off the talk going to certain events, but like you say, if they're shining the red flag laws in the best or case scenario where they saved a life of somebody that was really in trouble, and then there's no yeah but after it, then the whole audience only hears that one golden scenario where it seems like it makes sense, and they don't hear a yeah but it also causes this and that can also be a bad thing. There's no balance, check and balances in those conversations.
No, and there's nothing more that frustrates me when I hear people talk about their red flag law and talk about all the lives it's saved allegedly. And my whole thing is I would only count that as if the person told me after the fact, right? I think they do a lot of speculation on what would have happened, but every individual that this allegedly saved, I would need to hear confirmation from them that said, yes, I was going to do this if I wasn't red flagged. And that's the only way I think you count it. And when I ask a lot of researchers if that's the way that they measure the success of their red flag law, none of them have ever answered that. None of them have ever said, yes, hands down, that's how we did it. We ended up going back to the person that got red flag. We interviewed them. They confirmed that all the negative thoughts in their head is what they were going to do. So we put them on it worked list. It just, that seems like the only logical way to do it. But, if people are going to skew their numbers, and obviously we know how much money is in research and making things look effective. So that's what's going to happen. One of the things I wanted to bring up today, and we talked about this briefly because we were kind of laughing about it, is MMA fighter Sean Strickland released a tweet. Unless you've been living under a rock right now, everybody knows that the United Healthcare CEO, his life was taken in a shooting, a very unfortunate event. It's not something that anybody who is pro or anti-gun is happy about. Although you might see some people that have little empathy because the guy ran an insurance company, health insurance company, and a lot of people are angry at health insurance companies all the time. And vigilante justice is a real thing, but in the end, this is a man who lost his life, who has a family. So it's a tragic event, and no one's trying to make light of it. But Sean had a tweet, and it was really funny because it kind of addressed some of the absurd things that come with gun laws, right? And how we as gun culture always say, why do you punish law-abiding citizens? Like, why do you only make these laws stronger for people that are doing the right thing? And the tweet was really funny. I'm going to read it here. It said, Sean posted this a day ago. He said, it's going to be really easy to find the United Healthcare CEO killer. Step one, search all of the New York database for everyone with a CCW since the weapon was concealed. Step two, search the ATF records for everyone who has a suppressor in New York. Going to be really easy. Now, obviously, Sean was being sarcastic. I don't know how you missed the sarcasm there, but I guess I've followed Sean's career long enough to understand that most of the stuff that comes out of his mouth is sarcasm. And some guy responded with, "Not if it's a black market gun." And Sean's response was, black market gun. Clearly, you're an idiot. Why would a criminal use a black market gun? What would be the point of gun laws if you just cannot follow them? Idiot, go away. And it was a little bit more explicit than that, but and obviously everybody in the know knows how funny that whole exchange is. And the fact that he missed the sarcasm pretty much twice, I think. But that just goes to show you that we get frustrated as a community, as a firearms owning community, because we got to go through hoops to obey the law and do things the right way. and then a criminal can just roll up in a place where you're not even supposed to have a gun in New York City and shoot and take a life and just jump on a bicycle and go away. And literally, like, we get blamed for that, the gun owning community. That guy is not part of the gun owning community. That's, I guarantee you that was an illegal gun or a stolen gun. Uh, but anyways, what are your thoughts, Kevin?
Yeah, I think it's just a greater picture of the two sides don't really talk that much of if you're in same kind of those healthcare where one side's having that opinion and there's no balancing, then everybody continues to have those opinions and there's nobody to be like, yeah, but have you thought about it this way? And nobody really knows. It's almost like Fight Club of until you get into kind of the gun culture and the gun side, you don't understand all of the things. You don't understand why when the media says, "Oh, an AR is a weapon of war and no civilian needs it," like it's easy to agree with that when you're only hearing one side of the story. So I think that's the importance of conversations like these of, hey, let's talk about the other side and balance some of these common misconceptions out a little.
Yeah, even, we talk about the AR thing, and obviously that comes up all the time, but and it's very confusing for people just because of the look of the firearm, right? It's like, once again, it's the Rambo gun, and you watch him on fully auto, just like mowing down a bunch of people, and you see that what you think is the exact same weapon, sold at a gun shop, not realizing that it's completely different, and the way it's used, the way that mechanically it works is completely different. I've had that conversation over and over again with sometimes the same person who, after time, has kind of let that belief system get back in their heads. Where I'm like, it's not the same gun. It's not fully automatic, right? Um, and you have to have that patience to keep revisiting those conversations when there are people making decisions about guns that aren't even into guns at all. I mean, that's the toughest thing. Like, I don't find myself in a lot of brain surgery conversations because I don't know anything about brain surgery. So I'm not even going to enter those. I'm just going to be curious if I enter that realm of conversation. Um, I'll, Guns are like one of the only things that people have such a strong opinion on. And you can ask that person, like, how well do you know guns? And they're like, oh, not at all. I've never even held one. So, it's always interesting when you hear something like that, and it's really easy to misunderstand.
Getting a
And
question from the chat.
yeah, and anybody who wants to come into the chat and pose some of the misunderstandings, we welcome that today. We want to make this an open conversation. Let's see, what do we have here? You want to read it off?
DJ asked, what can gun owners do to ameliorate the misunderstandings or the naivety of those who don't understand gun laws and their attendant issues, like most of us already do? I think it's just maybe you can answer after, but putting in ways that people understand. Like, I know a common way I'll address the AR thing is be like, yeah, for maybe me and my home, an AR isn't my first choice, but if I lived on a large property, I definitely wouldn't want to go out there with a 9mm pistol. I would definitely be choosing an AR to for my defensive firearm or something like that, and pose a different idea in a different context in a way that people can understand, or different scenarios instead of just being like, well, it's their Second Amendment right, and just having a shallow kind of rebuttal and defense to it.
Yeah, I think let's just use the AR example for DJ Play Nice, right? Like for me, when someone says, "What do you think about banning ARs? Like, how effective do you think that will be?" I always say my classic line. Like, if we're talking about drunk driving, and I told you red sports cars, if we just ban red sports cars, I figured it out. We'll reduce drunk driving, or we'll get rid of drunk driving. What would you say? And every person says, I would say you're nuts. And I was like, that's how we feel in the gun industry or the firearms owning community when you say ban this. And obviously, we can point to CDC numbers, FBI statistics. Hands and feet kill more people than ARs, right? Um, so I usually when I tell people that, most of the time they're taken back by that statistic. And I'm like, just look it up. If you don't want to take my word for it, look it up right now, because the numbers don't lie, and it's the CDC. Gun people don't trust the CDC, but most everybody else trusts the CDC. So if the place that you trust is saying that the AR kills less people than hands and feet, then it's like, okay, let's pivot to another discussion. I'd rather have you say, I hate all guns, I wish they'd all be banned. I would respect you more than you just saying this one type of gun that's not going to put a dent in anything. Because I truly believe, let's pretend we could wave a wand and get rid of all ARs. It's not going to stop school shootings because you haven't got the root cause mitigation. All you're doing is making the person pivot to another type of firearm, which could be just as effective and just as deadly. I mean, hell, nobody even a 22. You go in there with a 22, you could do a lot of damage, right? So those are the type of ways that I like to approach it. I think one of the most important things, though, is being able to stay calm and being able to hear something that you're going to say in your head that's absolutely stupid, and still be able to stay calm. One thing I notice about firearms owners when they get into these debates, sometimes they you know, there's a reason why people say, like, cool is the other side of the pillow, right? Like, stay calm, don't never let them see you sweat. Because usually what I'm trying to do, if I'm in some sort of conversation, there's usually other people listening, and I'm really trying to attract the people that I know that I could get to or make them think. I'm not trying to change the mind of, say, like a David Hogg, who has made a living off of digging his heels in and saying what people want to hear, these kind of rah cheerleading terms, talking points that people really don't know what they mean, but they just sound really good because it's under the guise of less death, less harm. So that's one of the ways I approach it.
Yeah, and I think the firearms community could do, as a whole, could do a better job of spending more time and resources talking to the people in the middle and the neutral or that kind of population. It almost feels like politics at some times where gun owners will only talk with fellow gun owners, and maybe the gun industry and companies will only talk to their already customers, and there's not that as much converting that other side by easily logical conversations where the anti-gun is just kind of battering ram those arguments into everybody's head to where that's the only message they hear. um, so all those things, like you said, the red sports car, no, that's not going to do everything. But if the media was showing how deadly red sports cars were and all that, there might be that same shift in mentality of, well, yeah, if you ban red sports cars, they're the problem. I've seen it on Fox News, CNN, all that. So if there's more conversation about the other perspective, we could probably make a little headway.
Yeah, it's really, not to switch gears and get off topic of firearms, but it's like the American. I own four. For those of you who follow me on Instagram, I own four American bullies. Right. They're the most loving dogs I've ever met, and I'm a huge American Bully fan. And I've never ran into an American Bully that's actually been angry, mean, or bitten, and I've bred them. Right. Like, so everybody that I've bred a dog for, I still am in contact with. I did that one time, never going to do it again. But there's nine children of my American Bully female out there. And I look at Europe and in what they did in England, and they banned American Bullies. And I read some of the comments about American Bullies, and I'm like, what? This is crazy. Like, how I mean, to me, like, chows are the most angry dog I've ever encountered. Every chow I've ever met is super protective of their owner and angry, right? But obviously, some way in England, they freaked people out about American Bullies to where they banned the breed, which is insanity to me. And you're right. It's just like with firearms. If you pick a certain type of firearm and you villainize it, you make it the scary thing. You're going to get that reaction. But I guess this goes back to, we have to pose the question to everybody that we're having a discussion about firearms with is, what is your end goal? What is the goal of what you're trying to accomplish? right? And I feel that same way when people talk to me about, are you just trying to reduce suicide by firearm, or are you trying to reduce suicide as a whole? Like, what is the end goal? Are you, when someone says, hey, we should ban high capacity magazines, okay, so what's the goal of that? Is the goal to only have 10 people killed in a mass shooting potentially? Or are you trying to save all lives? So what is your ban doing? Well, if it only helps, if it saves 5 lives, then it's good. Okay, what's your threshold for death, right? Now you keep walking them into a place where they have to really think about their answers. Because I've never had anybody, when I said, what's your threshold for death? They never usually answer that question. Especially when they say, well, if it just saves 1 life, what's your threshold for death? It's like, okay, you don't want to answer that because it's a goofy statement. And it's a cartoon statement, as Christian Conti would say, everybody take your drink if you have one. Uh, it's not realistic. It just isn't. So, I guess that's how you have to think. But what do we have here? Okay.
DJ has another question that's kind of complicated. So DJ is asking, in cases where a person decides they should separate themselves from their firearms, what are some indicators that it's safe to reclaim them and good steps to follow once the decision has been made? I'd say it's complicated because a lot of states and locations are having issues of like who has the liability of if a FFL or gun range is holding it, do they have responsibility for not giving it back too soon? I know we've seen some places where we're working with where it's a set amount of time of like 30, 45, and both parties sign. So it's like, hey, it's after the agreed amount of time. And that way it removes liability off the FFL, but it's hard. From a personal standpoint, what would you say as the individual? How would you know when it's the right time to try to get your firearm back?
Well, I think it depends on the situation. So, for me, if I'm going to your house, Kevin, right, and you're not doing so good because your wife took off and she's not letting you see the kids, right? Like you know, that's a tough situation for a lot of people to be in. And it's like, that's part of an action plan that we have to talk about when I take your guns or you take mine, right? Like, I think that's what kind of like what we talk about in the action plan is having communication with whoever that person is, that loved one or friend, to say, look, let's just get the guns out of the house until we can sort through this. But I think it's also empowering to the person that we're removing the guns from to say, how do you want to do this? How do you want to play this? The, uh, for me, I would almost invite, like, if you were coming to take my firearms out of the house because I'm going through it and I confide in you and I trust you, I would almost say, Kevin, I want you to give them back to me when you feel comfortable, or at least like I can call you and have that discussion. Hey, Kevin, I think I'm ready to have my firearms back. What do you think? Right? I think that's what unconditional love and trust is about. Because you're asking to take someone's property, or someone's telling you to take their personal property away for a moment of crisis, which could last 24 hours, a month, 6 months, whatever it takes, right? And maybe there's some action plans, like if I'm hurting and you see me drinking too much, maybe, and I want to change. I want to get off the kill spot. Probably a horrible phrase to use in this situation, but I want to get off the kill spot, right? The whole point of support is communicating with your support to say, let's set goals, right? Okay, I'm going to go to rehab. And when I get out of rehab, if you're comfortable giving my firearms back, give them back to me. So I think that, that's a great question. And I don't think there's an easy answer for it, because I agree with you. It's super complicated. But I think, setting the goal and setting the plan is, what are we both comfortable with? Or what are we as a collective family comfortable with? Because I'll tell you, I mean, I'll be vulnerable here and talk about, there was a time when I was going through my divorce, because I've never had suicidal ideation or anger, but when I was going through my divorce and there were games being played by lawyers and my ex, I fully understood why people snap. There was a time when I had to prove, and I ended up winning custody of my daughters in the end, and they ended up living with me throughout, after 4 to 6. I just sent one off to college. There was a time when I literally was like, when does she have to prove she's a good parent? Why am I constantly proving everything? Everything they throw up at the wall, I gotta prove that I showed up to schools. I gotta prove that I helped with homework. I gotta prove all this stuff. And those were times when I was like, this is where now I get it. Now I get why people snap. Not that it's an excuse. You should never snap, right? Once again, after I just said, never let them see you sweat, stay calm, but I understood it, right? Now, part of that, if I felt like I needed to have the firearms removed, or people were like, listen, I'm worried about you, your anger, you're expressing the things you're saying, I would have had to come up with a plan for that with whoever was taking the firearms out of the house.
And I think both of our responses just show the importance of answering those questions in the mental health plan. It's so much easier to outline a plan of, hey, I think this would work between us, and get that in the right mental health kind of space with your friend, and having that friend that you already know you can go to, instead of you're in a bad place, you don't really want to be vulnerable, do you seek help? There's so many more barriers. And then for the other person, oh, they are in a bad place. How do I really know that nothing's going to be bad and I regret giving the firearm back too soon? If not answering questions on the mental health plan to at least help that process early make that situation hard. There's no easy one size fits all answer.
Yeah, you just reminded me of a story when I first started this organization, and I was going on all kinds of podcasts, and there was this I can't remember which one it was, but a very pro 2A podcast invited me on, and they wanted to do like point counterpoint type of deal, and they were bringing on this lady who was super pro gun, and they were bringing me on, and I think they misunderstood where I was coming from, because I think they thought I supported red flag laws in some cases. Um, so I think they wanted us to argue, and it was really interesting because the lady had done her research before I came on, and the first thing she started about the conversation, like when it came to talk about it, she was like, "Oh my God, I wish your organization existed when my husband took his life." And I was like, "Oh, sorry to hear that. Like, what was the circumstance?" And she's like, My husband took his life with a firearm." And she's like, "The police came to the house." And she was like, "I was so distraught that I wanted to get the guns out of the house." And she's like, "I didn't want to lose my guns, but I wanted to get the guns out of the house." And this is back in the day when we were um, promoting, you know, uh, we had this our first program for WGTA was a safe storage program for gun shops, and we realized like how cumbersome that whole project was going to be. So it's just better for us to recommend this stuff than to actually have our own program and try to go across the country and get all these gun shops signed up. So we ended up pivoting, but at the time that was one of our major focuses. And she said, "I knew I needed time, so I just wanted the guns out of the house." And she's like, "I gave them to the cops." And she's like, "It took me over a year to get the guns back when I was ready." So to go back to Play Nice's question, right, is sometimes people know themselves. Like she knew she was ready to have the guns back in the house. She just needed to get it out there. So, there's always that you can trust the person has healed, or they've gotten past the traumatic experience or the crisis that they're in as well. And I guess that's just going to come down to a judgment call by you, uh, communicating once again. Like some people, some gun owners know themselves. They know themselves so well that they're just like, "Look, I need to get it out now, but in 3 days, I'm gonna be good. I just need this to pass." So I think all these things have to be weighed and measured and calculated and talked about and discussed and have trust. And ultimately, maybe you give someone the call, like, "Hey, if you're feeling better about it, then when I tell you I'm ready, and if you feel like I'm good, I'm good."
Yeah, it would be interesting to maybe talk with one of the armory project in Louisiana's partners who have to go through that situation where they're FFLs provide temporary storage options. How do they go through that situation in a variety of different scenarios? I bet sometimes they maybe know the customer really well, and maybe sometimes they just saw the program on the website and that's their first interaction.
Yeah, I mean, one of the guys from the Armory Project is Caleb Morris, right? We've had some conversations with him, on conference calls and everything like that. That's the type of guy that, like, he's so no nonsense and like so not afraid to bring these things up. Like, that's the type of guy you want to store your guns with, right? Because I'm sure he has a process to where he really communicates with you and stays in touch. Just because that's I feel like that's the type of guy he is. Um, which goes back to having that trusted person be part of this plan or this, moment, is going to be so important.
How would you address the, I don't know, firearm equals negative outcomes from firearms increasing, and oh, we need databases and mandatory training, all those things. It's kind of a lot bundled into one, but how do you unwrap that topic?
Well, once again, you got to figure out what they're saying. So I'm going to, I heard you say something. I'm going to pick on that one thing. I'm going to talk about the mandatory training thing. Um, and I'm going to use my mother as an example, who's pro gun, but sometimes forgets it. And she just blurts out because she's super liberal. Sometimes I think she listens to the echo chamber and the talking points and just goes that way. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's who she is. Guns are not the hill she's going to die on. But every time there's a mass shooting, my mom falls right back into the trap about we need mandatory training with firearms. And my first response to her is, so we could make that school shooter more efficient with his gun? Like, what training would you have given that kid? Now, granted, she could make the argument that if there was mandatory training, maybe there would be some suicide prevention and mental health implemented in that training that could have gotten through to this kid early. Okay, that's fine. But once again, I think that's a stretch and a jump. So it's like I try to figure out, like, what do you think mandatory training is going to cut down on? There isn't a firearms owner in our community, like, who's a staunch 2A supporter, that doesn't think everyone should have training. They just don't want it to be mandatory. Like, nobody wants mandates, right? But anybody that is pro 2A and is talking to someone who's, hey, I think I'm about to get into the firearms owning space, I'm curious. We always say, pick the right gun, find the gun that's good for you, and get some training. Like, none of us say, oh, training, you don't need that. You're fine. You know what I mean? Like, you'll figure it out. It's easy. Nobody says that. Gun shops don't say that. You know, um, it behooves the gun shop owner, because usually they have a relationship with somebody in there who's an instructor. So they're going to try to push the training. That's a natural thing. So it's like when I hear somebody say something like that, once again, I get, what do you want to accomplish with this training? Like, what do you think is going to happen? Now, obviously, you have to do training to get a license and everything like that. And I always try to say, like, I get the importance of that, but this is the constitutional right. It's the only object that's in the Constitution. Um, you have a right to own a firearm, period. So take it up with the Constitution. Try to get that changed. That's what I always tell my mother. But that's not always the best way to approach it, but it's the honest way. Sometimes you have to say, like, that's the difference between cars. That's the difference. You know what I mean? I think it's incredible that we don't have to have a license to make a human. Like, literally, people freak out about guns, but I could make the next Hitler accidentally, because I don't have no business raising a child, and I, like, uh, that blows my mind. Like, bigger picture. And every time I say that to someone, when they're like, "I can't believe you don't need a license to own a gun, or this and this and that," and I'm like, "Well, some states you do, but some states you don't." But how crazy is it that you don't need a license to make a human? Like, I mean, that is wild.
Yeah, there's
So,
more for
uh,
adopting a dog of, come out, make sure your fence height's good enough, but kid, they're like, "You're on your own, good luck."
yep. Yeah, here you go. Both you young knuckleheads. You
Yeah,
two
I
knuckleheads from Jersey who like to argue all the time, who want to get married at age 21. Good idea. Make children.
I've seen the quality, argument too of, like, when things are mandated, the quality of the training isn't necessarily there, and I think of in some cases of, like, the firearm CCW mental health video of, like, Walk the Talk has a lot of resources and connections to where I think we were able to put out a pretty quality video, but think of all the other organizations that probably don't have a firearm owner, let alone instructor or mental health gun owner on there. And they just see, oh, it's required. So this is a money grab. They have to do it. So let's just put out all these trainings. But I don't know how many of those are quality.
Yeah, that's one of Jake Wiskerson's big thing. He told me from day one when I met him, mandates bring out the charlatans, right? The people that are trying to get that position to where they can get paid and just do this one thing, and sometimes they don't do it well. We give all of our stuff away for free. Um, I think that's something we pride ourselves on, because it's like when I look at all these, like, like take, for example, the firearms instructor course. I think we have the best one, period. Now, granted, it's like me talking about my kid, right? Like no one wants to say like, oh, we don't have a really good one. Um, but I do. I look at it like the other people that are doing it, and I'm like, you're not doing it better than ours. So you either copying ours verbatim or use ours. It's free. But I know people are not going to like that because they're going to want to make money off of this stuff. And it's ridiculous. But that's one of the things I love about ours. I mean, we hear more from the people in states where it's not mandatory, the firearms instructors, than we do from the people in states where it's mandatory. So, I love that we made something that firearms instructors can appreciate, and they're implementing it into their curriculum, and they're not even being compelled to by the state. Let's see what else we got here. And my eyes are going.
DJ, but if you legally own tools and want to fix your plumbing, you have to complete a class administered and controlled by government offices. I've used that as an example to promote thought.
Yeah, yeah, that's
What
true. Well,
what what eye-opening thing is it that brings you the most success when you're talking at these mental health conferences or like things like, all right, Washington, probably less people that think the same way as maybe Utah or Texas. Is it the statistics? Is it presenting kind of countering their logical? This seems like it would work with your logical kind of counters. What do you think works the best?
well, first of all, I think what works the best is when you provide solutions, and that's the one up, that's the leg up that Walk Talk America has always had. Like, we're coming into every conversation with people that even oppose the tool that we are so fond of with our own solutions, when the expectation levels that they have no solutions, they're just going to pivot towards the Constitution, Second Amendment, pry from my cold dead hands, bitch. Like that argument, right? um, Apparently, I said that on the Colleen Noir show, and that stuck with a lot of people. So, but for me, it's being able to provide the solution. And not everyone can provide the solution, but you can point to the solutions, right? You don't have to go up there and say this is what we're doing, but you can, because Watch Talk America is all gun owners, right? Like, we represent the firearms industry. So I have no problem with a person who's not even affiliated with this organization using Walk the Talk America solution in their argument or their discussion, their nuanced discussion with an anti-gun or a gun ignorant person, to say this is what the firearms industry is doing. Because all the people that are doing this, like uh, Ruger, the bursts, those high points. And I'm going to shout out Keltec because Keltec is actually putting us in their manual for their new firearm, which I think is just awesome, right? Like they're making a choice to actually tackle suicide prevention and better mental health for firearms owners. So it's not just a walk the talk thing. Like they're deciding to do it, right? Like they have to put the energy into doing it. So, shout out to them for doing it. All the organizations that support us, but make that argument, show the person that there are things being done from our end, and we're not just sitting there going, no, 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 this is a mental health thing. You guys have to figure it out. We did that for far too long, and I think part of that was because we didn't know how to fit in. We got so caught up in the fight and the things that we were called, and we just stopped communicating. It's just snowballed from there. And then it was like, well, what can we do? Well, we can't do anything. Some people started to do little things for suicide prevention, right? Like, you look at the places like Wisconsin and New Hampshire that really had kicked off safe storage programs on a local level. Those are like the OG pioneers of suicide prevention. But now we've evolved into more better mental health, getting upstream to prevent the unpredictable, not just catching people when they're in crisis, getting gun owners to change the culture, the way they talk, their language, the way that they can sit down now at the table and present ideas and not have to worry about, I have nothing to offer as far as solutions go to this crowd that I'm talking to. So I think like that's a huge part of it. Once you offer those solutions, get people to put their guard down. It, I'm going to go back and talk about PTAC, right? And I wish I had this on tape. Like I wish we were. I'm sure there's video out there somewhere. I just got to ask Debbie from Mental Health America if it exists. But that was a crowd. Our audience was split. There was law enforcement and social workers, and it was the first time it had ever happened. Well, when I talked about gun companies putting this card in the boxes of their guns, I was like, yeah, we get gun companies to do this, and companies like X, Y, Z are doing this. They erupted in applause. It's the first time it's ever happened to me, and it was awesome. Like it was cool to see people clapping, like of the idea that we're doing something about this. Because I think because of the narratives created by the media and because of the talking points, no one expected us to do anything. No one expects us to do anything. They think we're just going to be combative. Now here we are doing things that are so out of the box that they didn't even think of that, right? They could have thought of that. They could have thought of that years ago, way before Walk Talk America existed. So that I think is a long way I answered your question, but I think that's what resonates with people. You get their guard down because they're like, okay, wait a second, this guy's talking about stuff I've never heard about and I never even thought was possible. And half the people in the crowd doesn't realize that a new gun comes with a gun lock, a trigger lock, right? So like they're still stuck in some of the old ways. God bless their hearts for for coming up with ideas that we've been doing for years. You know what I mean? But that's the problem when you're not communicating.
And that's almost kind of the problem with the situation we're in. Everybody wants to reduce negative outcomes from firearms, and they're not exposed to any solutions from the firearm side. It's only a lot of healthcare people that want to reduce maybe suicides or whatever it is, and they're trying their best at a lot of times. Yeah, there's a handful that are anti-gun and have their own agendas too, but it's almost like there's a great white shark attack, and the marine biologist community isn't doing anything that knows that audience or demographic well, and it's the public that coming up with solutions. Obviously, a little different as the great white sharks would probably need to come up with their own solutions themselves to be a perfect analogy, but it's something that's so out there in the media, but everybody thinks, oh, the gun industry isn't doing anything. They're fine sitting where they are and just defending, when no, there are solutions and there are innovative things that have been happening now and even in the gun lock case in the last 10 years. And yeah, we might make fun of the gun locks of, oh, that's useless, but what if somebody's in crisis, you could take your gun lock, then instead of throwing it in the trash, put it on their firearm, and you didn't break a potential transfer law or something, and secured that firearm in that moment.
Yeah, see, and there's the evolution of gun culture, right? We, for many years, when we heard the term gun lock, we just applied it to having your gun locked up and how dangerous every second could be while it's locked up and you have to get to your gun, right? Never ever considering, well, what if we only need to use this in a suicide prevention scenario or a mental health crisis? So, like, now that lock, I don't look at it as just like a device to lock your guns. Obviously, I lock all my guns up. I have two daughters. I don't trust them. I don't trust their friends. I don't trust people. So I have to train retrieving my firearms as hard as I do training with my firearms or shooting my firearms. And I think I got it down to a science. Like, I just showed someone the other day how quickly I can access all the staged guns in my house, right? But they stay locked up. That's the way it is. That's the way it's going to be, because I'm not going to contribute to any negative outcomes. Like, I'll be damned if a gun ever gets stolen from me. It'll just piss me off. Um, Not just because, hey, there's probably a gun out there and now it's going to be used against us in some sort of weird way, down the line. But all my guns are valuable to me. I love all my guns. So they're going to stay locked. But, the cultural shift of kind of being able to say, some of these locks, so I'm not going to use it on a daily basis, but I might need to use it for a month while my kid is going through a heartbreak or something like that, right? Like, I'd hope you, if your kid's in the house, you're still locking up guns, but I'm going to be realistic. That's one thing I hate about a lot of the research and all the people that say unrealistic things, right? I want to be the realistic guy. Like, I need you, maybe you're not going to go 100% in, but maybe you go 50% in. Like, that's a start, right? If I can get you started in the right direction, then that's fine. But when I hear things like, hey, the gold standard of keeping a firearm is separating the ammo from the lock gun. No, that's a clown gold standard. That's not realistic. That when gun owners hear that, they just shut down. So what I want to do is be like, look, you need to find out the best way for you to store responsibly. And I pretty much know you're never going to not have your, gun and your ammunition together, like, or separated. That's not real. So let's talk about how you store responsibly the way you feel comfortable doing it, and kind of changing that mindset. Okay, well, like, here's what I can do, or here's what I'm comfortable with. And that's the way we got to look at it. We can't just crap all over cable locks because we know we don't use them and everybody throws them out, and think that everybody thinks like us. Like you said, you hand that cable lock to somebody. To me, the message that comes with that cable lock is probably more important than a cable lock. All the things that you could say while you're handing someone a cable lock and saying, hey, like, you might need this in the future. Why do you think I need this in the future? And now you could tell them, hey, like, we're gun owners. We need a mental health plan. This might be something that you use when kids are over at the house, for a picnic, or your grandkids are over, or something like that. Right? Like, that's how we got to start looking at it. And I think once we start looking at it like that, I think you gain respect, right? Because once again, they didn't expect to hear it from us.
Why is separating your firearm from your ammunition a clown world? You kind of did the opposite of what you preach, of just kind of brushed it off as a clown world. But every healthcare organization we consult with or materials we see have that as the number one advice. So for somebody from the mental health or healthcare side that hears you say it's a clown world, why is that so ridiculous?
Well, it's really, that was probably a little too harsh. Okay, there are probably some people that will store their firearm like that. I would not say it's the pro to a gun enthusiast that's going to ever do that, right? I think like that message may resonate with the person who's like, I just want a gun in the house. I'm never going to take it out and shoot it, but I want to have it just so I need it. And I know what any listener right now is thinking. Like, most of our listeners are probably rolling their eyes, right? Like, okay, that's fine. But so that might work for that person. but the reason why it is a clown world, because it's the anecdotal world that I live in. 100% of the people I know, like when I go to SHOT Show and all the people in the industry, not one person I know stores their firearm like that. Like in the end, people still think every second counts, and in cases it might, right? The risk I'm willing to take to have unauthorized access is to have them locked up in biometric and quick access safes, but I'm not willing to not have my firearms be loaded in those safes, right? Like at least to where I can move on it. That's realistic in my world. I am not the only one who thinks like that. I know plenty of people that do the same way. I usually ask people, how do you keep it in your safe? Now, do I have safes in here where they're unloaded firearms? Of course. I have way too many firearms to not have that. I have an overflow from working in the industry for many years. But all my stage guns around the house to protect me and my family, they're ready to go. Now they're locked away. That is more realistic to me. I think gun owners, especially pro 2A and people that are really in the culture, that take training serious, that are they're not going to accept, like, put your ammo in Mexico and bury your gun in the ground in Canada. Like, I know that's like a stretch, but
I mean, it works though, because you have to think of what 95 to 99% of gun owners' primary firearm is a defensive firearm. So, with that as the main reason most gun owners own a gun, you're thinking that I have a multi-story house, so I'm going to have the firearm on the one story, and then I have to go in when I'm worried that there's probably an intruder in the home down to get the ammo. That just is a deal breaker for so many and pretty much all gun owners.
Look, I have no issue with any researcher or any mental health organization or, anyone who works in behavioral health saying, look, my gold standard is you lock the gun away from the ammunition. But realistically, you're probably not going to do that. So let's talk about all the other ways that you could secure your firearm, right? That you could store responsibly. Like, I have no problem saying that, but I'm not into just making a statement to somebody and having them go, oh, okay. You know what I mean? Walking away and being like, that'll never happen. So it's like, I hate to say it, Dan, but I compare it to like talking to a kid about sex. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's like we can tell them, wait, don't do it, or alcohol, right? Don't do it. You don't need it. Don't do it. But realistically, unless we're micromanaging that kid with GPS trackers and everything like that, like they're finding a way. Like I found a way to do everything I wanted to do growing up. My mother could not play God, and she gave me the best advice she could give, and I took some of it, but I did what I wanted to. So gun owners are the same way. They're going to do what they're comfortable with. So my whole thing is, if I can get you to start somewhere, let's start that way. It's not a compromise, but it's like, let me make you think, what are you going to do?
Yeah, and I also think it needs to go on the other side too. With a lot of the firearm and gun owners, we need to do a better job of responsible storage when it's appropriate. When you need a safe, and that it's not, well, every second matters, so safes are useless in a defensive shooting. Well, we probably should do a better job at that. I liked what was it, Joe Bertozzi's answer of like, if a second or two to access your firearm that quickly is that big of a deal, then you need to do a better job with your home security and a lot of other things before that being the reason.
True. All right. What did Play Nice?
DJ said.
Yeah, he's adding a lot of good things to this. So I like this one. I can read it.
Can you? All right, go for it.
All right. In addition, I do not have children or uninformed guests. I choose to store in ways that are far less traditional. I do not want to be told where and how to stage or store my stuff. And that is fair. That's what I'm saying. That is fair. Like, the only thing I can say is, let's say the way you have your firearm staged on your bedside and it's wide in the open, like pretty much unless someone breaks into your house or you're not home, like you're good to go. Like you are your own storage unit at that point. Um, but I don't believe you should be chastised or talked down to because that's the way you store your gun without because you have no kids in the house and you don't have guests that you don't have an eye on or people aren't dropping by randomly. Um, yeah, I mean this is what I'm saying. We got to start talking to each other in the most realistic ways that we can, especially researchers. Yeah, I mean, is someone going to say hey, if somebody breaks in and steals your gun and it's used in a crime, yeah, so be it. That's the risk you're taking. But realistically, is that happening? I mean, people get their cars stolen out or their guns stolen out of their cars all the time. um I it is what it is. I'm not going to change the way you do things. My biggest thing would be if you said you had kids around the house, right? Like that's a bigger issue. But I agree, no one should be telling you, especially a non-gun owner, how you store your gun. You just have to do what's best for you, and think about ways that you can reduce it. I mean, I'm not gonna deny that before I had kids, I slept with my firearm right next to my bedside, like ready to go. You know, that's the way it was. It changed for me with children. So for me, it's a non-starter. I have to have those things staged and locked up. But you have to do what's best for you and measure out where your security level is. That's just that's just respect to how you handle things. I was on a podcast the other day, and I was talking to a couple of the guys, and they were like the old timey, 2A guys, and they were super polite. They invited me on the show, but every one of them thought the answer was, I don't want to say beating the hell out of your kid for touching the firearm, but they did not see safe storage like I did around children the same way. For them, it was like, well, I taught my kids and they knew not to go near it. And I wanted to be like, pretty sure they went near it when you weren't around, sir. You got lucky. I talk about my first time encountering a firearm and shooting one was a negligent discharge because my buddy's gun. We found his dad was a ATF or not a DEA agent, and he had a 9mm in the dresser, and it was ready to go. And we got really lucky. We dodged a bullet, pun intended. It is what it is.
Yeah, it's frustrating. My wife and I, we have young kids. It's hard to keep them out of anything. They always get into something that you did effort to prevent them getting into. And we definitely have some people in our lives that have their firearms out in various places. They're very accessible. And when we approach them, hey, did you ever think about maybe a quick access safe or something, at least use when the kids come over or something and they want no part of it? And then we have to make the decision to go over to that individual's house less or not at all because it's just like not worth it. It's like we do our best and they get into stuff that we never intend them to get into in the house that's not that dangerous. Why should we take the risk of bringing them over there and potentially putting them in that situation?
Yeah, it's funny. I was on a podcast about a month ago, and the host is former military, and he told this story, and it kind of resonated with me. Um, so he was over at a buddy's house, and he had his own, not the buddy, but the host of the show had his own struggles with PTSD and suicidal ideation when he was younger, and he had just gotten out of the military, and he was going through a really tough time. And he said that he went to the bathroom at his buddy's house, who I think falls under the category of like DJ, right? Like didn't have any family or anything like that in the house. But he's like, I was walking to the bathroom, and he's like, and I looked in through the hallway in his bedroom, and his nine was on the dresser. And he's like, I thought in my head I could just go over there and grab it and shoot myself. Now he didn't do that, right? But when he said that to me, I was kind of like, damn, like imagine if you put your buddy through that. I mean, that's awful. But who knows what people think about when they're in crisis, right? I don't think they do think. As someone who lost someone very close to him to suicide by firearm, I know they're not thinking. Um, but like that's an example of, you know, this person was leaving his gun around thinking he's perfectly fine, and you know his friend, obviously they're close, is familiar with firearms and everything like that, and he said he had the thought but he just kept going to the bathroom, but it stuck with me when he said that. So I mean there are cases, right? And I don't think that's the norm, I think that's the exception. But in a nuanced conversation you have to address all of it, right? Like that's what you try to do. There's always going to be these one-offs and things like that. You know, and once again, you got to weigh that risk.
Yeah, yeah, especially, I mean, there's no negative to having that option of storage device in your home when maybe people come over. Yeah, you don't use it 90% of the time, but maybe there's an opportunity where you wish you had it. Better to have something to lock up your firearm than not have a solution and wish you did later.
Yeah, and you know, I know what probably everybody's thinking. Like, hey, guy could jam a knife in his neck, right? Like, we could do this all day. Like, we can move a goalpost and whatever, right? I'm not here to do that because I don't work in the knife industry. I'm here to reduce negative outcomes of firearms because I work in this industry. Um, but I sold more when I was a salesman, working for Eagle. My family, when I first started, I was a salesman, and they would send me on all these promotions, and I would go work at gun shops and sell Bursas. And I sold more Bursas, Bursa Thunder 380s. If any of the listeners are familiar with that, we had a very popular 380. One of the things that made it so popular was we had an integral locking system. Now, a lot of people are going to roll their eyes and go, I would never use that. Well, you didn't have to. The integral locking system was there to use if you wanted to use it, but you could have a fully functional firearm all the time and never use that damn thing. Like, never turn that key. You had a little key that went in the side and you turned it and you went from F to S. And when you went to S, that gun was as good as a paperweight. You could throw it at somebody and really hurt them if you threw it in their head, right? That's it. Gun wouldn't go off. I sold more guns, especially to females, when they would come up and say like, "Oh, I like the way this 380 feels in my hand." Um, I would always talk about the safety features, right? Because I'd ask, "Do you have grandkids? Do you have kids? Do you have anything? Do you ever have picnics or barbecues where there's like numerous kids around?" They're like, "Yes," and I'm like, "Well, if you ever do that, you could just lock the gun, put the key in your pocket, and now this thing is a paperweight. So even if a kid finds it, they're not going to be able to do anything with it except throw it." And I sold more guns like that than I think most people would believe, because they were like, "Oh, I like that feature's on there, and I could do that. I could just make the gun inoperable when I want to. Doesn't have to be all the time. Could just be a moment, right? It could be a few hours, and then we unlock it and go back to the way it was." So yeah, I mean, you just got to think about all the different ways that you could store it and when it's necessary.
All right, I think we did good. We hit a little bit over an hour. We don't need to get into another topic for an hour and 30, but hopefully this was good for other
I
people
get
to hear.
long-winded, man. Like, yeah, you know, good. We accomplished what we wanted to do. First time back in a long time. I look to have another pop up though. I want to, as soon as we get back from the conference, I want to come back, do a pop up, talk about what went on at this conference, because I am sure. You know, I always say, look, I want to be challenged. I want to feel like I lost an argument in this stuff. I think this could be the time where I might get the most pushback and challenge, which I'm really, really looking forward to, just to see how this is going to play out. So I think our next pop up episode needs to be me reporting back what happened in Seattle at this gun violence prevention research conference. Um, I'm excited about that. So we'll have to
Yeah.
do that like right when I come back.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I feel like you're going to have all the people that are armed with their own statistics, and from the gun industry and gun community, statistics are usually an enemy. But I think there's also an opportunity to make some relationships that will kind of turn that tide more and look to do some research to further the solutions that you and other organizations kind of are coming up with.
Yeah, I need them to be curious of all the solutions out there, not just the ones they know. And I need them to research some of these laws in the sense of how do they prevent people from getting help. Like those are my two goals when I'm speaking to this crowd. I don't think it's a huge ask, and I think once I ask politely after I talk about all the things we do, maybe it gets some gears turning in some of these universities that historically have had an anti-gun stance or kind of frowned upon guns to think differently. And on that note, we'll close out before I go on any longer and push this over. But I want to thank all of our sponsors. I want to thank DJ for coming in today and asking some good questions and making some good comments. Um, and obviously, thank you to all the listeners and everybody else that supports WTTA. We look forward to having a really big year next year. I think there's a lot of excitement and things happening, and without your support, it wouldn't be possible. So if you could share our message, our mission, these podcasts on your social media channels are greatly appreciated. And we will see you again soon in about a week.